with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
Welcome to Lead Story, everyone. I'm Ed Gordon. In 1968, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, and James Earl Ray was convicted of his murder. 25 years later, some believe that there is new evidence that warrants a reinvestigation into the King assassination. Joining us about that discussion is former House delegate for the District of Columbia and chairman of the 1978 King Assassination Subcommittee, Reverend Walter Fauntroy. First, let me introduce you to our journalist, Allegra Bennett from the Washington Times, Dwayne Wickham of the USA Today and Gannett News Service, and Clarence Page from the Chicago Tribune. Reverend, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. Let me ask you, last week we had a chance to discuss what broke nationally, talking about the question into the assassination of Dr. King. One of the things that begs to be asked here is if indeed you chaired that committee in 1978, why didn't you push during that time to continue looking into the reinvestigation, if not by your body, someone else?
Well, we did, in fact, do that. I initiated the effort to get the Congress to investigate with the introduction of a bill at the end of the 94th Congress. The 95th Congress, we got it. I became chair of the subcommittee on the assassination of Dr. King. We were delayed for about 3 months by an internal controversy that caused us to have to wrap up the investigation at the end of that Congress in 1978. By that time, we'd established two things. One, that there was a conspiracy. And two, in the committee, judgment of the committee, that Ray had fired the shot. We had some leads, however, that we asked the FBI to follow up on. And some 2 years later, they came up with a report that said nothing. So that the only thing that reinvigorated me has been the fact that first, I've had a chance to go through my raw materials that I kept, some 15 boxes of it. And two, an enormous amount of investigative work has gone on in the private sector by rather courageous and determined journalists that have revealed much more information than we had available to us then.
Reverend Fauntroy, before we get into a discussion, and I'm sure we will, about the conspiracy, your theory on the conspiracy of the assassination of Dr. King, let me ask you about yet another conspiracy, and that is a conspiracy, I think, that is born out of this surveillance that we now know about, constant surveillance of Dr. King. Army intelligence, also surveillance by the FBI. We've seen many reports about this. Where were these people on April 4th, 1968?
Well, that's precisely the question that I want the Congress to respond to John Lewis's urging that there be a hearing. I was on to this story as a result of some things I found in my files that were not made public. It is shocking to me that Army intelligence had 8 Green Beret officers in Memphis at that time. And the time has come to ask the question, who were they? What was their background? Were they the hit killers that had been trained by our intelligence agencies in the decade of the 60s that took out Lumumba, took out Trujillo, that attempted to take out Castro? Secondly, what was their mission in little Memphis on April the 4th, 1968? And most important, to whom did they report? I want to know that. And when I know that, I'll have the whole package, I believe.
Well, Reverend, do you believe now James Earl Ray fired that shot or not?
I do not believe that. On basis of the new evidence that is developed, one, and on basis of my own perusal of materials that I kept. The case against James Earl Ray is very weak. In the first instance, there is no physical evidence that a shot was fired from that bathroom on the second floor. Secondly, I have at least 4 people who reported that they saw a sniper in the bushes below the window. Solomon Jones, who was Dr. King's driver, Bernard Lee, who was his chief aide, a fellow by the name of Earl Caldwell, who was working for the New York Times at that time, and a fellow by the name of Harold Cornbread Carter, who we could never catch up with. We got reports about him having said he saw someone. But during the 2 years of my investigation, we could not find him.
So they saw someone, but they didn't see a shot fired from the bushes?
Well, we don't know about cornbread, but none of the people...
He may have.
He may have. None of the others were looking that way. But when the shot was fired and they heard the report from that, they looked. And Earl says he saw. Solomon Jones said he saw. And what appears to me now to have been the case was that the fellow who was locked up in the bathroom was the spotter. And the marksman, which James Earl Ray was not, was the one below the window. The other thing is...
So you say the fellow in the bathroom, you think that was Ray or maybe not?
No, it was not Ray in my view.
Maybe not Ray, okay.
It was someone who was guiding him and probably had communications, particularly if Army intelligence were involved. I was just sharing with him the fact that we had a number of false reports to go on the police radios, and we could not track it down after 2 years of investigation. Now it appears that the only institution in this country that had the capability of being able to give a false report, saying that the Mustang is fleeing south, when in fact it was fleeing north, were people with Army intelligence
You're talking
capability.
about actual live police reports
Without question.
in the chase that occurred after the shooting.
That's right.
The pursuit of this white Mustang.
That's right. It was diversionary action.
But 25 years later, we get further and further away from the evidence. The trail is cold. What do you expect to accomplish at this point?
Well, first of all, we need to know what happened, because if, as writers like Kurt Gentry, who did a book on J. Edgar Hoover, The Man and His Secrets, in which he outlined an insidious relationship between J. Edgar Hoover, leaders of the Mafia, from Frank Costello to his protege, Carlos Marcellus, who headed the Southern Mafia, to Clint Murchison and H.L. Hunt, rich Texas oil money. We need to know whether or not that sensitive relationship came together in a murderous alliance that planned the killing of Dr. King, executed it, and then covered it up.
But how do we know that? I mean, all it seems we would end up with is conjecture. You have some reasonable conclusions, but where are the people who were involved? It would seem that with all the power of the committee that you chaired, that there should have brought in at least some of these people who you can now go back to, and maybe they've decided it's time to free their breasts of the truth or whatever, but it just seems the trail is so cold.
What we know about the operatives in the intelligence establishment of this country in the decade of the 60s is that people who break don't live. We, for example, identified, the reason we got onto the conspiracy to kill Dr. King was that my staff identified a person who claimed that he had been offered $50,000 by two Southern business people to kill Dr. King.
Reverend, let me hold you right there. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue this discussion. We'll be back in just a moment.
Lead Stories, sponsored in part by Emerge. Find it wherever magazines are sold.
The infamous Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, the site where Dr. King was killed, and we are going to continue our discussion as to whether or not there needs to be a reinvestigation of the murder. Reverend Walter Fauntroy is with us, and Legre, you want to follow up?
Yeah, you said just before we went for break that there was evidence, or at least allegations, that there were two businessmen in the South who paid someone $50,000. You were going to tell us a little bit more about
Yes, the gentleman's name was George Russell Byers, whom my investigators unearthed in a report that had not surfaced up here in Washington, the FBI agency. We got him in. He said, yes, he'd been offered $50,000 to kill Dr. King by these two businessmen, John Sutherland and John Kaufman. I asked him, well, why would they offer you? Did you ever kill anybody? He said, oh, no. I said, now, brother, you're under immunity here. You can testify. Tell me, did you kill anybody? He said, no, I never killed anybody. That was not my line. He said, but I had a brother-in-law whose name was John Paul Speaker. Now, he was in Jefferson City Prison with James Earl Ray, and he had been there for a few years because he had been convicted of having, with malice aforethought and for pay, killed a person. I said, we must talk to John Paul Speaker. I sent our investigators to the prison. They said he's gone. He's not here. We found him running a fruit stand outside of St. Louis and dragged him to a hearing. He refused to cooperate in any way. He just took the Fifth Amendment. And at that point, he was one of those we asked the FBI to follow up on. About 6 months later, he came out of his house in the suburbs of St. Louis, got in his Cadillac car, stepped on the gas, and went on to where he was headed.
So the FBI followed up on him?
Well, I can't say that.
How much of this, Reverend, can we put together?
Exploded, yes.
How much of this can we put together and just suggest that throughout history we've seen the FBI, we've seen the CIA and other counterintelligence agencies kind of work autonomously from the government and just assume that this kind of thing, unfortunately, is going to happen in real life. There's question about Kennedy. There's question about King. And what can be done?
The most important thing that can be done is for us to get the outline of what happened. Because we lost 4 of the brightest, most courageous young men this nation has produced in the decade of the 60s. Malcolm, Martin, Bobby, and John. And I don't think there's any American in this country today who does not see this new generation in the 90s coming on the scene, who does not shiver when he sees a Bill Clinton plunge into a crowd of admirers shaking hands, that you don't remember George Wallace out here in suburban Maryland and remember what happened to that generation that was blown off the face of the earth. What we need to do is to find out what happened and then serve notice if remnants of that apparatus are still out there. That if you tried in the decade of the 90s to change the political landscape of our country through the barrel of a gun, it will not be as easy to cover it up as it was.
But why won't it be?
Yeah,
I guess that's my
really.
question.
Why won't it be?
Why
Because
won't it be?
we know now. You know, we simply accepted the fact. Look, Lee Harvey Oswald all by himself decided he was going to kill the president. That's that. Warren Commission said it. We said, well, if the Warren Commission said it, fine. We said, James Earl Ray, a 2-bit criminal who hadn't been able to pull off a crime without being arrested within a couple of hours of the crime, was able to pull this off by himself. And then to say that Sirhan all of a sudden got the idea that he was going to hit a man who was on his way to the presidency after winning the 45 electors in California. I'm going to take him out by myself.
But therein lies the argument.
We accepted that. Now we know better.
Well, let's take it backwards, Congressman, and let me play devil's advocate for a moment in our pursuit of truth. The same argument made about Oliver Stone and various others. Why is it that the same government that couldn't cover up so many other snafus that the CIA and the FBI did over the years, I mean, they eventually came out, including harassment of Dr. King, far beyond just surveillance.
Sure.
I mean, the FBI had agents provocateurs there in Memphis and various other places. Why is it that these conspirators have been so good in covering up this, not just King, but all these other secrets over all these years in Washington, a town with leaks aplenty?
Yes. It was successful because when you had the fox, guarding the chicken coop, you can black out areas. One of the things that bothers me is that the documents we put away for 50 years were documents, copies of which I have, but which were blacked out on questions. I said, Congressman, you can't see this because it might endanger our national security. I want to see everything behind every black mark.
Let me ask you about how we get to the bottom of all this. There was a congressional investigation. You were a part of it. There have been all kinds of investigations, Warren Commission you've alluded to earlier, and yet there's still questions that abound. Why is it not possible for an organization like the Congressional Black Caucus, the NAACP, to call upon the National Bar Association, an organization of top-flight black lawyers, to undertake a black investigation of this assassination?
I have a very clear answer to that question. In the first instance, having done the congressional investigation, I don't think it can go through a government organization. It's too easy to employ people at various levels who can intercept and take care of things.
But the National Bar Association is not a government organization.
But what you need is an organization that has subpoena powers.
But yours has subpoena powers.
We had government powers, but we had a situation where government was feeding us blacked out stuff. What you need is a sort of special prosecutor who is governed by a quasi-public board that is comprised for that purpose, and most important, has the governmental power to get every document.
Well, what would keep them from getting blacked out material? I mean,
No. If you have the power to get unblacked out materials.
But isn't it kind of frightening to say that the congressional committee didn't have that kind of superior power? One would think that
It did not. It did not and would not.
So how could someone else? I mean, that's what I find a little
That's why I
puzzling.
say what we must do is bring those files they put away for 50 years. Because now, having reread them in light of what other independent journalists, and one of them is gone. His name was William Sauter, who did a book that really linked the Mafia to what happened in Memphis. And he committed suicide.
Reverend, let me ask you this, because we've got to wrap.
I guess you don't
What
believe
do
that.
we do then, today? I mean, who do
Two
we look
things.
to?
We look to the Congress to have a hearing and find out what was the Army intelligence doing with respect to Memphis and with respect to black people for 75 years. Secondly, we need a special prosecutor type who has governmental powers to subpoena and is governed by a body that is selected for its objectivity and for its determination to get at the truth for the sake of this generation of leadership. That what happened in the 60s to that generation does not happen in the 90s to this.
Well, Reverend, let's see if in those 30 years something has changed. We will see. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back with a closer watch in just a moment.